Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Miles. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Hi.
Hi, Martin. How you doing?
Hello. Hi.
Thank you for joining us this morning.
I'm very curious already about our conversation.
It's been a while since we all last chatted.
Hi.
Hi, Peter.
Hi,
How you
Peter.
doing?
Hi. Good to see you. Hello.
So thank you again for getting together for this panel discussion, the Sunrise and Sea Monsters panel discussion. And I suppose I better start by saying Sunrise with Sea Monsters is an experimental documentary that charts the journey of a humble desktop hard drive from the domestic shelter of the desktop and out into the perilous romance of the British landscape to explore speculative ideas on memory, data, humanism, and futurity. So in this panel discussion, I'm happy to present three of the interviewees from the film, Peter Kazansky, Martin Kunze, and David Roden. And during the discussion, we will discuss their work and research in more detail and explore speculative ideas on the future of humanity and its potential relationship with information stored in the present to be communicated to the far future. So that's kind of the intro. And I just wondered if you could each introduce yourselves and discuss your work briefly. So if we start with Peter.
Okay, so my name is Peter Kazansky, and I'm professor in the Optoelectronics Research Centre at the University of Southampton. And I do research on applications of lasers, and in particular nonlinear optics, new optical materials, and also optical phenomena. And during the last maybe 20 years, or more specifically, maybe 5 years, I pioneered the field of ultra-fast laser nanostructuring in glass, which leads finally to invention of so-called 5D memory crystal, which now holds Guinness World Record for the most durable data storage medium. In simple terms, we use lasers to write information, but normal CDs or DVDs, they use CW lasers, low power lasers, and which burn plastic, holes in plastic. And we use lasers which generate very short pulses, and we burn holes, but nanostructured holes inside glasses. And this also helps us because we do not simply burn simple hole, but we produce nanostructures which we can control. So this brings us additional degrees of freedom to store information. So in total, we can write information in so-called 5 dimensions. So this gives us a high capacity. And what is more important, because we use laser and basically cave in with the laser, we call it voxels in glass, which is very stable. This data storage is very durable. Potentially, it can survive at room temperature billions of years. So currently, again, this is my main research, working on a very robust data storage medium.
Thank you. And Martin, can I just ask you?
My name is Martin Kunze. I'm the initiator of the Memory of Mankind project, which aims to store a snapshot of our era to future generations and to a far future. We use ceramic data carriers, which I developed due to my background as silicate technology. The other background is an art study in the Art Academy in Linz in Austria. And we collect different contents from different sources from all over the world. And also individuals can take part in this project to submit their personal stories to be kept in this archive. This archive is a small room within the oldest salt mine in the world, 2 kilometers deep inside the mountain. These ceramic data carriers are basically high quality bathroom tiles. On one hand, on the other hand, we use ceramic microfilm, where we can write also with a laser in high durable surfaces. I would say our data carriers can stand even more temperature. It's resistant to 1,200 degrees. So the only limits of this archive are geologically. So as long as the archive is kept under the surface, the information will be kept there. But right from the point of view right now, as we store digital information, this is the key reason for this project, is that there will be a big void in the history of humanity from the early 21st century, because the way we store information now is so fragile, and it will be almost no information in 100 years, 1,000 years from our century or from our era right now.
Great, thank you. And David, can I get you to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm David Roden. I teach philosophy for the Open University. My work, at least since around 2010, has been on the theme of posthumanism. Just to fill in the background there are different kinds of, posthumanism is a philosophical idea. Roughly, it enjoins us to perhaps be suspicious or questioning about the humanist frameworks that we bring to areas like philosophy, politics, ecology. So the particular application of posthumanism that's interested me is what I call speculative posthumanism. Speculative posthumanism applies this questioning of humanist frameworks to the future. At least that's certainly the initial phase of my work. So at least part of speculative posthumanism is questioning the various frameworks that we bring to thinking about the future. But that also applies to the various kinds of projects that are involved in making that future, or indeed appealing or storing information for that future. And I guess that's why, one of the reasons why I think taking the discussion of the 11th chapter of H.G. Wells's Time Machine in the film was a kind of neat illustration of that, where you have a human time travel encountering a kind of alien being on the shore of a dying planet under a red sun, where there is, in a sense, no mutual comprehension and no possibility of mutual comprehension. And that's a kind of extreme, if you like, it's one of the extreme sort of human post-human scenarios that I like to think about.
Cool. I'll roll two questions into one. Is, since we last spoke, which was sort of like kind of the end of 2017, beginning of 2018, I mean, I was interested in what developments there have been in your research and your work, and I guess I should probably ask, like, what impact has COVID-19 had on your work as well? So Peter, we'll start with you, if you want to just...
Starting from impact of COVID, or starting from developments?
I guess so, starting from developments and then moving on to the impact of COVID.
Okay. Yeah. Basically, when the last time we were talking about, 2 years ago, yeah, or 2.5 years ago, yes?
Yeah, it was a couple of years ago now.
But at the time we talked to you, and at the time we were just the project with Microsoft started at the time. So at that time we managed to attract attention of Microsoft, which is a major company in data storage and especially in cloud storage, and they were interested in our technology. And during this couple of years from that time till now, I think development was that we managed to convince Microsoft this technology will work. So they were convinced that we proved the principle, so that writing in glass with ultra-fast lasers could be used as a very good way of storage, data storage, especially for cloud, cold cloud data storage. So specifically, we managed to, one of the key problem for us was writing speed. Anyway, so this was a bit main challenge. And during the last 2 years, we managed to increase the speed maybe about 100 times. Now we can write 100 times. So with the speed comparable to CD writing. So previously speed was about 100 times lower than CD. Now we can write with this high speed. And that's why now we managed to write sizable disk, like already even hundreds of terabytes could be written in a reasonable time, at least in a few days. But still, it's quite long time. But so the main improvement. So now we can write hundreds of gigabytes the data, and also this data could be read out. So this is the main development for these 2 years. So the concept works. So now we need still to improve the speed of writing to megabytes per second, in order to, or even 100 megabytes per second in order to write terabytes of data. This is for the next years. And basically, and what is interesting, obviously, now even such companies like Warner Brothers are also convinced that this technology will work, and they will maybe can potentially move all their archive of their movies to our data storage. So for them, it's so the idea is to replace tape. But again, on the first note that I want to say, so maybe so we will soon develop technology which will at least will make humans immortal. Anyway, at least now we can reach at least digital immortality from the point of our knowledge will be live for maybe forever.
Okay, I mean, that's an interesting point on the digital immortality that maybe I want to pick up with David later. But there was just a quick point because you were saying that you're collaborating with Warner Brothers to archive movies on the 5D memory crystal, because in the film I sort of found out that weirdly Hollywood movie companies were using film as a storage medium for digital films because it's more a more stable format to use. So you're saying that they're now interested in your technology to store movies then for the long term?
No, yes, basically, again, this close collaboration was done by Microsoft because we transfer our technology to Microsoft, and Microsoft now, because they're more advanced in technology, they have more resources, so they managed to record and read this movie with all error corrections for Warner Brothers.
But I think the thing with film is it's a visual medium, whereas yours is still inherently a digital medium, isn't it?
Yeah, no, yes, but yeah, that's for sure. But so when you migrate the data regularly, so you can lose information. Yes, the data could be lost. Yes, that's. But if you would like to store something for for 1,000 years, so basically, the more times you migrate the data, the more chances you can lose something. It's much better to write once and forget it. So and then that's why it's much more interesting. But as I understand, it's not only the problem of losing the data, but also the problem of cost. Because if there is a lot of these movies, yes, and you need to, it's very expensive to maintain it. So that's why.
Okay, so let's move on to Martin then. So Martin, same question to you. I mean, for the last 2 years, how has your project developed? And then subsequently, how has COVID-19 affected memory of mankind and your work?
Well, in the last years, I realized that the awareness of the necessity to keep something permanently still rose. I realized it from the start of the project in 2012, where it was still hard to describe what I was doing and explaining why it is necessary. In the meantime, it's much easier and much quicker to explain what I'm doing. And especially in the last 2 years, I was approached by different institutions or entities who work on the idea to store humanity's knowledge, as they call it. And we had these discussions, and there is a a paper prepared for the European Union or for the Parliament to encourage the single nations to keep their most important, I would say, legacies or heritage in a permanent way. In this paper, there's some people from ex-MPs from the Parliament, and we had this internal discussion about keeping humanities knowledge, which I personally don't find so necessary, especially the knowledge which is inherent in the universe. So this is what happened in the last years. We were approached from different entities and we could bring ourselves into this discussion in a very important point. So changing the idea of storing knowledge rather to storing humanities achievements in the sense of culture, art, music especially. And when we're talking about music, it's what Peter mentioned, you need to know the kind of format you're storing music. When you store music in a digital way, you need to also provide a way to decode it. So these are also projects with, let's say, the Mozarteum Foundation in Austria. They want to store Mozart works, and we suggested to have the partitur. I don't know, is this the right word in English? How Mozart wrote down his music on paper, displayed beside a graphical sound wave, beside a digital file of uncompressed music similar to the early WAV format, which is more or less an analog format of music, and then beside a compressed music file such as MP3, in order to provide a possibility for future finders to construct their own decoding algorithms. Some kind of Rosetta documents in the same way as we do with images. You have the image, and beside the bitmap, and then beside the compressed format. Probably because of the Corona crisis, we could focus much more on the technical development and in the collaboration with this, let's say, Mozarteum Foundation or the Austrian Chancellor Chamber for the Chancellor, I don't know exactly the name. They're also starting a big digitalization program in Austria to combine all existing digitalizations from the museums to make it public or accessible for the public, and store it also on durable data carriers. When you have when you do the effort to scan old, hundreds of years old manuscripts, then you should, on the other hand, have a possibility to store them also for the same period of time on digital data carriers.
Okay.
Not only mouse.
Projects like yours are designed to be run in the long term. So I wonder if events such as, like the COVID pandemic will read like rings in a tree or something. When a tree grows and then it's, for whatever reason, its growth might be stunted, or an extra cold winter or a hot summer, and you can read that in the rings. And I was wondering if, like the narrative of the MOM archive, you might be able to, to have these moments in history that sort of like, stand out amongst the rest, because I guess your archive is built from like this idea of bottom-up history, which is very much like submissions from individuals that have stories that they want to keep. So
yeah, and we are collecting Corona stories and Corona diaries worldwide, where the people writing blogs, they can submit their blogs, so we can store in descriptions of daily life from the point of view of individuals. in this archive. There are some cooperations with other institutions or universities who also collect these corona diaries, which I think will be quite important to the future, because the official statistics and so on, they will be kept in the national archives, certainly. But the personal stories people writing down today on blogs, they will disappear in 100 years.
And so I just wondered if I could move on to you, David, and just talk about the work that you've been doing since we last spoke, and how COVID's affected your research as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's gone in a number of directions. Some of the work I was doing after my book Posthuman Life came out was fairly in the area of kind of theoretical philosophy, particularly concerned with the nature of meaning and interpretation, which I think is pertinent to what we're talking about here, because one of the things that strikes me is that what we store isn't content. I mean, it's not information, it's data. It's literally physical alterations to matter. For example, changing the polarization of some kind of some molecular structure. And in a sense, no mark, no language is self-interpreting. There's no magic language. It has to be interpreted by something, by something that understands meaning, is able to grasp meaning. So, in a sense, the technology, the effort of digital storage does raise lots of questions about the addressee of that data and how it will read the data, and hence what really is actually the content of the data, because the content is not intrinsic to the physical substrate. To some extent is dependent on how that substrate is processed, how it's decoded or read.
I mean, leading on from what you're saying, David, I just want to sort of talk about like human futures, because obviously this is what everyone's interests are, that sort of that unite everyone in the discussion, you know, like sort of thinking speculatively about human futures, and thinking about basically trying to sort of like in a way project concepts of our present into this sort of like unknowable future, which is constantly changing all the time, and constantly, you know, like you know, the rug is constantly being pulled from under our feet with how we perceive humanity in the future to be. And it's funny that, you know, sort of as I was sort of doing research for the film, you know, to be able to speculate on our futures, you have to sort of like think kind of archaeologically about our past in a way, you know. So the further you think, the further you have to look back, and you know, and I guess the present is a sort of moment that's sort of like in tension between the far future and the far past in a way. And like as we kind of develop technologies, we move ever more rapidly away from our past in a way. But it's really hard to sort of like grasp a concept of the future. Maybe it's worth just talking about how, you know, that COVID has affected your thinking. I mean, you were just talking about it, David, but how COVID has affected your thinking about, you know, like sort of this potentiality for human futures. And also it might be worth mentioning when Peter mentions the idea of digital immortality. And I'm just wondering, you know, like if, yeah, I just wondering if you could sort of like muse on that, David.
Oh, well, obviously there are lots of ways in which you might interpret the phrase digital immortality. That there's obviously been a substantial current in transhumanist thinking, which has been concerned with literally making human beings immortal by, in some sense, storing them on some kind of computational system. So the basic idea is that that the mind can be understood a bit like a computer program, and you can store it essentially as numbers or some kind of vector which defines various, if you like, computational transitions within some kind of system. And if that's all the mind is, if the brain is like a computer, then in principle you ought to be able to write the sort of the vector that describes the structure of your mind and store it on some kind of more robust medium, and perhaps live in some kind of computer simulation. I don't know. So that's one kind of digital immortality, and obviously it depends on a whole load of very speculative and questionable assumptions about what minds are, and about what people are. So, for example, even if minds were something like computer programs, does it follow that simply uploading your program to another media means that you get uploaded, or are you simply duplicated? So questions about the nature of mind and the nature of personal identity actually pull apart here, and they're both pretty deep. And obviously one can question whether that's there are various arguments such as John Searle's Chinese room argument, which purport to show that the mind can't be a computer program. So the Chinese room argument basically proposes that we could have a little man in a box who has rules for understanding Chinese, which consist of instructions for shuffling around various symbols, and the symbols are kind of placed in an input into one end of the box, and the relevant output comes out the other end of the box, and all the man does in the box is obey certain rules for symbol shuffling, which produce the requisite output. And Searle argued that while if you're outside the box, it might seem as if the box understands Chinese, the person who's implementing the computer program doesn't know any Chinese. He's just obeying the rules for connecting and combining symbols in a way that a Chinese speaker could understand. So that's one argument. It's quite a popular argument for the claim that instantiating a computer program for, say, generating comprehensible Chinese utterances is not the same as understanding Chinese. And that might be one reason why we're suspicious about the idea that the mind could be computationally stored. But of course, there are more near-to-hand examples. So, for example, if you just take a sound file, like a regular audio file, that's just a series. It's just, I think as Martin was saying earlier, it just stores a series of numbers which give you, if you have a digital to analog converter, it gives you, you hear a sound, but actually the file itself simply consists of an array of numbers which could be shuffled and reorganized in lots of different ways. And I've done that myself. You can write, so you can read the file using a ramp function, which will give you a regular audio output, but you could read the file backwards using an inverted ramp, or you could put in a sine wave or some crazy sort of way of reading the file, which will produce a completely new sound, a completely different sound to the one that's totally stored, supposedly stored. So a digital storage medium is intimately dependent on how it's read. Obviously, so what is stored is not simply a function of the physical marks in the medium, it's also a function of the interpreter or the reader. And of course, that raises the question about who our interpreters are, because in a sense, what we store, what constitutes heritage in this, where we're thinking of a horizon of deep time, is to some extent dependent on how this heritage is used and read, and not just on what we transcribe onto it.
Yeah, I sometimes compared say that dinosaurs had some technical industrialized society which we don't find any traces from. But if they had stored something similar like the Memory of Mankind archive, it still would be interesting, and I think so extremely interesting for us to try to decode and read and understand in a way what this kind of archive would contain. If we, I don't know if we would be capable of, but if some tools were stored, some, like say Rosetta things, which are based on fundamental things in the universe, like sound is just a physical thing. Here on Earth, a frequency in the air has a particular sound to us and to animals and to any species, as long as the air pressure in the atmosphere doesn't change dramatically. So if we have some hints how to hear this kind of sound wave, and in what, well, must be defined in what kind of speed and where you start and so, of course. But if we display it in a way which are based on physics, I think we could also decipher a sound file from the dinosaurs. If we could really understand what it is, it's a different question. If we could emotionally find a connection to this kind of music, it's completely different, but it would be interesting, and I think it would be possible to get some information out of it.
I guess it's interesting you're talking about this sort of like an emotional connection towards information, because you were saying about the MOM archive that it's not, you're not storing knowledge for knowledge's sake in a way, like you're not storing these sort of like objective truths about the universe. You want things that are much more subjective and open to interpretation. And I guess I do have a question here that's kind of like, because we're living in very interesting times at the moment. You know, it seems like every day something else is happening. Like even the concept of truth, you know, is very much in question at the moment. And I think, you know, there's been a lot of big societal and political movements that have happened, that are happening at the moment. And I guess, you know, I guess there's an important question to ask is like, what aspects of that, or what moments in that are being chosen to be represented for the future, if you see what I mean. I think, you know, one of the big discussions that's happened recently that sort of lots of people have jumped onto is the idea of statues and like how do they represent the past, or do they represent reverence for the present? Do you know what I mean? Like, because, you know, like an object might move through time and its context may be changed constantly. And I think the statue discussion's been really interesting because, you know, like a statue is just this mute object that, although it's figurative, you kind of put your own meaning onto it, really. And I think they are representative of something in the past, but, you know, depending on what your education is and what your context is, you don't necessarily read it the same as the next person might do. So I'm interested in the MOM archive in that regard, Martin. You know, like you've got these people that are sort of telling their stories, and they're probably stories of important things that have happened to them, significant changes in their lives, or significant changes in the world around them. And you know, I just, you know, you know, what kind of like, what importance does that have for you?
Yeah, I think the comparison with the statues are quite interesting. When people are uploading text in the MOM archive, it's for free and can be anonymous. The only obligation you have is to answer the question, why do you think this text is worthwhile to be preserved? And this answer is stored together with the text. And sometimes this answer gives more insight into our time than the text itself. compared with the statues which were set up in a particular period of time with a particular content or context. And when we see the statues today, in most cases, we know the context, and this is how we can have an understanding what the statue is meant for. Of course, the context can change. You can put it out of context. You can put new context to it. But as long as the original context is known, you could, in a way, well, understand, which doesn't mean accept, but understand why this statue was put in that place.
And Peter, can I ask you what, I mean, you know, what sort of, what stories or what information do you think are relevant to be sort of preserved for the future?
Basically, it's quite an interesting question, but in general, just one remark. Obviously, there is interesting to preserve, obviously, possible as much as possible information and particularly in the raw data, because currently there is a lot of, they say, like fake news or something, and also information which is a little bit corrupted by the ideology. So the idea is, if possible, preserve raw data, but it should be, you need to have a lot of capacity to preserve it. But if just to select a small amount of information important, I think it would be interesting to and responsible to record the genetic code of every species on our planet as information. And it's at the moment we cannot reanimate extinct species because a lot of them been lost forever. And but it will be great if it's almost 99% of genetic code was on the planet was lost over the years. Yes, and then so it will be interesting to record the genetic code, and we would need to start this work very soon, as a lot of information is lost almost every day. So this is maybe a quick answer. And just I can show you one example. So there was a program Ancient Aliens which we featured, and here we recorded the book of the original species, Charles Darwin. It's a small book, at least we already did some contribution to this. But anyway, so like this is a little bit quite the first thing which could be done straight away.
So that, on that crystal, it's the origin of the species.
Yes, this is Charles Darwin's book. Yes. The file is not very big. It's about 300 kilobytes, but the whole book. But but what is important, we can guarantee it will last forever.
Yeah,
this is for sure. But this is so at least. But obviously, if now we can record all data about humans, so this would be great.
I wonder in relevance to what David was saying about sort of the readability of information or digital information in the future. Like, how do you, in terms, like obviously digital information is dependent on technologies that can read it or translate it at least and make it meaningful again. Like how do you, because you've created a technology that can outlive the universe basically, but I mean, will our or whoever discovers it capacity to be able to like interpret that information? How do you feel about that? How do you feel about this sort of like creating something that may without us become meaningless?
Yes, but currently, obviously, we need still develop this technology, especially in this respect. If how it could be readable in a very distant future. Now, currently, I think maybe more addressed to humans, because we just write also the code how to decode this information. So anybody who knows English can read it, but obviously we can also write images and to just seeing some write some symbols which will help to read the data. But strictly speaking, we need at least if we really needed to leave it for a very long time, so we need to think what is the best language to use. This is maybe we need a little bit to do a little bit more research. But currently, again, I want to say we can at least guarantee at least these are our crystals, because we obviously read them. No, it's like a text file, yes. So somebody with knowledge of English can read it. But also we can another thing we can also write and record images. So images, this is also fine. And I forgot to mention. So images could anybody read. Eh? So we're using the similar technology, and moreover, what is interesting, we can also record color images. This is also quite one important thing. So that we can record, make pictures of in color of our world, which will last forever. Which is other technology. All paintings will fade, but with our technology we can do it. Anyway, so currently I think maybe we need to combine maybe image information and digital information, and then to develop the best way to store it in order it should be readable.
How do you create color images?
But it's basically
for a layman like me.
it's simple. Maybe if you have because we record information in terms of birefringence. So glass is isotropic material. It's not birefringent, but birefringent material you can experience if you take a plastic, yes, and bend it, so you can reduce stress birefringence. And if you place a piece of plastics in cross polarizers, yes, into polarized films which are crossed, then you can see colors. This thing is called interference colors. Even the colors which you can see here in computer, it's also used polarization and polarization and polarized light and polarizers. So we can write information. We are changing birefringence, yes, and this birefringence and cross polarizers can reveal color.
You're recording more or less analog images.
Yes, yes. This will be an analog images. But this my comment. Currently, if you would like to store something for a very long time, maybe digital information. There's a lot of questions how we can retrieve information. So the best way, if you record analog data, yes, images. This for sure. Everybody could understand. So currently, the idea maybe we can combine digital information and with analog information. Then it will help to understand digital.
David, on that point, and talking about digital information and its potential to be corrupted kind of in the future versus visual information, how do you sort of see that? I mean, I guess again, like visual information is only I guess that's sort of maybe only relevant to our sort of conscious understanding of that in a way. I mean,
I think some cases it could be quite subtle. I mean, one issue that occurred to me during this discussion is that we're assuming a kind of distinction between the archive and what the archive stores or represents, when in fact the relationship might be more complicated. So if you think about the way our experience of intimacy and privacy has altered in the digital age, the way we archive things affects the way we live them, arguably. So that there's that kind of subtle, I think it's a fairly subtle point, but I think it's worth remembering that in a sense, archiving is not perhaps a purely neutral process, but it in a sense we're already archiving ourselves in our daily lives by using email, by using, say, email in preference to ordinary post, or computer files in preference to writing stuff in a diary. Yeah, I mean, I guess the issue about analog versus digital is an interesting one. I guess the point about analog information is that any change in that substrate is potentially significant, whereas in digital information it isn't. So if you have, you can store digital information using voltage changes, but the voltage changes will only be significant up beyond a certain threshold, whereas in an analog system, any voltage, even the most minute voltage change, could be potentially significant. So that may raise questions about ambiguity, I guess. I'm throwing this out there because I'm not sure if I quite understood how the nano-treated glass would be used as an analog medium, but I guess it's intrinsic to analog storage that all differences matter, whereas with digital storage, only certain differences or thresholds matter, and which is why digital is so convenient.
Yeah, just I would like maybe just a little bit to to explain that the idea of analog is to just write images. So images will help to understand without any language. You can just see something. So this is, so you don't need any language to understand the picture.
I guess so. I mean, I suppose images need to be interpreted too, yeah. I mean, I think the idea, for example, I know reading, looking at Martin's site, he mentioned that there was a kind of, he's incorporated kind of pictographic interpreting, a key for interpreting images, which seems like a really interesting way of dealing with potential ambiguity. I mean, I guess I guess there's always, it depends on what kind of culture is reading this stuff as well. I mean, for example, if you take I don't know, an image like a Grunwald crucifixion scene, obviously if you're not, I mean, you can see that it's a guy nailed onto a cross, but obviously somebody who's kind of imbued with the Christian tradition is going to read that in a very different way to somebody who has no knowledge of the Christian tradition. So, so images are always open to different readings. But I guess my earlier point about the analog was just about the nature of analog storage, that
the longer the distance is from the point when it was written, the broader the space for interpretation.
Yeah. And as I said, the point about analog is that analog, with analog, the problem might be in reading the storage medium, simply because all differences are potentially significant differences with analog. But I was going to ask Martin, because I saw your TED talk last night when I was preparing for this session, and I was very interested in what you had to say about deletion, the deletion of kind of the archives of information that we're producing now, and the obvious point that actually if that deletion ever has to occur, it will have to be automated. So I wonder if you have any ideas about how that how that great deletion process could be organized in a way that's actually sensitive to the, if you like, to the content of what's being deleted, you know, in a way that's actually more selective than you know, I don't know, just deleting files with certain kind of character strings in them, something like naive like that. I mean, I'm just wondering if there are, for example, you know, whether machine learning might have a role here, whether we could actually train machines up to select, to be more selective about what's deleted. And yeah, so I'm just sort of interested in if you have any ideas about the sort of feasible technologies for deletion.
No, I think the first answer could be very mundane. As long as the account is paid, the content is kept. And if the account holder dies, his credit card becomes invalid, so the content will be deleted. It's one thing, it's personal content.
Yeah.
On the other hand, let's say YouTube, for example, it's not personal. There are accounts, but people don't pay for it so far. Could also be a model of what information to be kept and not kept, or a business model of YouTube to let the people pay to keep their content. Also on Facebook could be a business model. Pay €1 a year and your profile will be preserved until it's not paid anymore.
It's an extremely painful thought in my case.
Yeah.
Because there's so much rubbish on it.
There was another point, because I remember there's a specific thing you say in the film that a lot of people seem to pick up on that always ask me a question about is when you said that you know, like data centers collectively, their energy consumption is more than air traffic in total. I just wondered, have you done any more research on that at all? Have you looked into that a bit more, and how has that changed or developed? Like basically the environmental impact of our information?
Right at the moment, I think the energy consumption and carbon emission from data centers is much higher than from the air traffic at the moment. But there are some explorations. How do you say? I don't know. There's some predictions of future energy consumption of data centers, data traffic, people using devices to read the data, to consume the data. So it will be going up to 20% of the world energy production in 2030. So it's even more if it's today. I think it's comparable to, or 2 years ago, to the energy consumption of Germany. It's the permanent energy consumption of the internet to keep data, to send data, to see data or information.
That's pretty terrifying, really.
But maybe it's normal for human. They say also brain consumes a lot of energy for us, yes? So maybe for humankind, if data centers consume a lot of energy, there is no way about it. So they should consume a lot of energy.
If we find a way to produce energy in unlimited ways, then it's no problem. The problem is we haven't found any energy source yet, and there is nothing on the horizon for unlimited energy production.
And I guess this brings us back onto deletion then, because I guess if there isn't a way to continue, you know, like infinitely store all this digital information, I guess that they may have to face the reality of deletion, or at least deletion of other aspects of our world in order to sort of sustain, you know, like sort of data storage. I mean, I think maybe that's a potentially interesting speculative film that might come out of it. I guess one thing, so talking kind of speculatively, maybe it's worth asking this question. I mean, you know, like, because I think I think in the film I sort of like addressed this idea of a far future, something that's so far removed from our present that you sort of, it's less about thinking about the future, more about asking the right questions about our present for, you know, for what, you know, for the survival of humanity, or even just our own sort of like understanding of ourselves now to you know, to help in whatever way. And you know, I kind of, and thinking about these ideas of sort of the Anthropocene and anthropocentrism, you know, and how humanity has sort of like centered itself. And I guess this kind of concept of long-term storage is very much a sort of in a reverence to humanity in a way, you know, sort of it's a symbol of our own importance. What future do you perceive there to be? Maybe a near future or a far future? I mean, things are, like I said, we're living in very interesting times at the moment, and things have, over the past 3 months, have changed radically already. So, I mean, you know, like, what future is there, and at what cost, and why, really? So maybe I'll start with you, Martin.
Yeah, as I introduced, the time horizon for the Memory of Mankind project is first a far future because the material is so durable, but the real purpose is the coming generations, to give them a possibility to have an insight into their past. So this is why we should select what we find representative of our era to be stored for the next couple of 100 years. In that sense, the Memory of Mankind project, of course, is something very self-reflective. We have to select what we think is representative or important enough to be kept for the future, particularly with the background that future generations will have very few insight into their past. If it really happens that a lot of the stored information will get deleted. And that's what I think personally is important, to understand your past, to have the understanding, or to know your past, to understand your present, and to shape your future. So this is why I think this is an obligation to keep a snapshot what we think is important to our future generations, so they can have their own decisions and their own informed decisions about how shaping their own future.
Peter, can I ask you the same question about your speculative ideas about our future, or our futures, maybe?
Obviously, like so we're all humans, and obviously, so we are driven, I think, by knowledge, and we obviously, it's quite natural for us to think about the future. So without thinking about the future, so we would already instinct. So and at least obviously, none of us know what will happen in the future, because even we don't know what will happen in a year time by now, whether we will survive this epidemic. But I hope we will survive. But anyway, just so I hope like we were like humans, we were developing over millions of years already. Yes? So basically, then I think we'll last even much longer, and especially if we'll now develop a technology which will keep our knowledge almost indestructible. Then it will help us not to make mistakes. So in the future, they will not make mistakes. Then maybe the wars will be prevented, pandemics will be prevented, and some disasters will not push us back into the dark age. And also, also quite important if we manage to preserve all our knowledge, and which will not be corrupted by ideology, and then it will be all this will help. And then maybe also in the future, but like Elon Musk also now have this idea to that maybe humans will move sooner or later to another world, and then and establish a colony on Mars or somewhere on another world, and this will help our species and information to survive almost forever.
I'm intrigued about the idea of like knowledge being corrupted by ideology. Like, I mean, just to play devil's advocate here, is corrupted ideologies, are they not considered knowledge as well? Like, do we, I guess, I'm assuming we're all of a certain political stance here, and as the world is sort of like, well, the Western world is very much sort of like leaning towards a more right-wing ideology in many regards. Is, like, does that affect what knowledge is what knowledge is considered important, I suppose, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yes, basically, yes, you're right. So,
well, David, can I bring you up on that point, maybe?
Well, I'm probably not the best person to ask about ideology, since I'm not sure if I believe in ideology, at least in the Marxist sense. But and obviously there are lots of theories of ideology and what ideology is. I guess I guess there are areas, for example, in our political life, just to take one example, where we need to tell stories. We need to interpret facts in the light of some picture we have of, I don't know, the good life, or what makes a worthwhile life. And as John Rawls observed, that's an area where otherwise rational people, reasonable people, can disagree on quite principled grounds. So I was thinking, for example, about, current arguments about, for example, whether transsexual women are women. That's quite a heated topic of debate on the internet at the moment. And my impression is that it's an area where actually reasonable people can disagree, because the notions of sex and gender are actually quite complicated, quite culture bound. There are sort of obviously scientific ideas about the nature of sexuality, but those don't yield a kind of very clear sort of sense of division or categorization. So it may be that what we call ideology is to some sense inescapable, because it's just part of the way people interpret their lives, and there may be, and the way you interpret your life may be underdetermined rationally, that equally rational people may come up with completely different readings about what makes a worthwhile life, what makes an identity, what makes a person. And what kind of political organization is best placed to realize those possibilities. So I'm not sure about, if that's true, then ideology isn't, if we can use that term, isn't necessarily corrupting, it's perhaps inescapable. Because there may be areas where, for example, something like scientific rationality or formal rationality doesn't really help us. Of course, that may not be true. I'm kind of really working hard not to adopt a particular position here, but I mean, it does, and that obviously has implications for how we understand heritage and archiving, because how do we archive these subtle disagreements where, as I said, equally rational, equally smart people may radically disagree, and to the point at which they troll each other on Twitter, or they actually do physical harm to one another.
And I guess he's sort of talking about debates that are happening about transgender women online, and I guess there's obviously with Black Lives Matter at the moment. I think there's been a few people that have pointed out, they've called it a movement, as though it's a sort of like a short flash in the pan in the present, but it's a historic matter that's not going to get resolved today or any time in the near future. It's something that's going to evolve and change over time, and it's things that are so intrinsically sort of interwoven into our understanding of our own society that that it's hard to sort of like sort of break those concepts down, or those ideologies down, I suppose.
Yeah. I think I learned more about what slavery might have been like, say, from reading Toni Morrison's Beloved, than I suspect I could have learned from many history books. And I guess the importance of literature and art there, and just ways of conveying kind of personal experience can't be understated.
And this with the statue, sorry to keep bringing it back to the statues, but I think in terms of like heritage, statues are quite relevant because they're visual mediums to kind of store the past, but without, nobody seemed to know have any concept of a statue's past until it's taken down. I think it's only becomes like the only sort of projected into sort of an educational arena once something happens to it.
The Colston statue is a really good example of that. I live in Bristol, so
of course, yeah,
it happened on my doorstep, and many people were complaining that the Colston statue was part of our heritage, who opposed the removal of the statue. What they failed to mention was that Edward Colston, the slave trader, was a 17th century figure. The statue was built in the 19th century. So the statue was always ready a representation. It wasn't actually part of the past that it represented. It wasn't a source for understanding that past. And in a sense, that shows the importance of actually having kind of educating people to be sophisticated about how they interpret history and the production of history. And the way history can be, the way in deciding what heritage, what to store, we construct not an idea of the past. There's this, this is particularly important in countries that have gone through some kind of independence movement, like Ireland, where decisions about which aspects of the Irish heritage could represent certain ideas about what it meant to be Irish, what it meant, and you could obviously apply that to almost any country. So you have to be sensitive about the, I guess, I can't get away from the term ideology, even though I'm not happy with it. You can't get away with it, to some extent, the unconscious ideological constructions that take place through the selection of what aspects of the past to store, and hence both in the construction of the past, but also in the construction of the present. So it is an area where we need to be extremely sensitive, I think.
Definitely. It's interesting that this, I wonder what resonance this conference will have at this specific time, when I guess we're living through a time, it feels like we're living through a time that's sort of like really putting our past and our future on the spotlight at the same time, without actually managing to get a whole grasp of the present at any point, you know. Yeah, I guess I didn't really get to ask you about your sort of speculative projections of our human or post-human future, David. If you sort of...
Well, I mean, certainly in my book and some of the stuff I've written, I'm quite cautious there. I mean, I think the key focus, both in the book and some of the subsequent philosophical material I've produced, is not so much predicting the future or imagining the future, but looking at the constraints that we place on ideas of the future. So, for example, will our descendants use some kind of symbolically structured language to think in? Are there perhaps forms of sophisticated thought that don't use symbolically structured language? Will they have something like the first person awareness that we have? Or if they do, will it be very different from us? So, you know, in the book, I have a little toy example where one group of people is trying to interpret another group of people, to interpret their language from scratch by observing them. The only problem is the people they're observing include events that happened 2 days ago in their notion of the present. So for them, something that happened 2 days ago is as present as something that happened a few seconds ago for us, which obviously changes the way that they might you know, the way we might read an utterance like "the cat is on the mat," because it's a present tense declarative sentence, but its truth conditions would vary between the two groups in quite radical ways, making an obvious kind of barrier to interpretation. So, yeah, and obviously when you're thinking about potential ways in which technology could alter human life, you know, I was talking earlier about the fairly modest ways in which just using email or text or electronic text changes our conceptions of privacy. Well, you know, these changes in the future could be far more radical. So the kinds of people who might be around, even assuming they're people as we understand them, might have minds and phenomenologies, experiences that are structured very differently to ours, which means that the way they might read the archaeological record that we leave them might be very different to the way we understand them ourselves. I mean, I'll give you a kind of parallel example, because my partner is an archaeologist and she works on Bronze Age animal figures in the Aegean. They're about 3,000 years old. They're figures of kind of bovines, you know, rams, sheep, the people just dropped on hillsides near sanctuaries in Crete. And you can see what animals that they represent. That isn't the problem. The problem is that reconstructing what they meant to the people who deposited them. Why did they deposit them? What were they trying to do? So it's not a problem of storing an analog image. You know, these are actually quite robust forms of storage. It's reconstructing the context in a way that makes sense to us. So you know, all those problems remain, but perhaps in the case of potential post-human futures, they're amplified by the fact that the potential readers may be, you know, may be very different from us in ways that we can't yet discern.
Yeah, I mean, Martin and Peter, have you got any responses to that at all?
Yeah, well, so what's I mean, they will certainly interpret from their point of view. We can't even say if it's right or wrong, or we can't say if this is right or wrong, what we are storing today. It's what we feel is important to store in the MoMA archive. But if it's the truth or not the truth, or representing the reality, there are so different realities, and they will construct their own reality with our stuff. It's just giving them a clue. Maybe they have some similar mindset, maybe completely different. If these are, let's say, people or societies which are based on the principle of cause and effect, they will be interested. What's the reason for it?
Yeah, you mentioned that in your presentation. I thought that was interesting, taking something as simple as an understanding of causation is, yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I mean, you know, this Lovelock thing where people are having this lock on the bridge and throwing the key over their shoulder into the river. So the locks will be removed from the authorities, but the keys will be kept in the river. And in thousands of years, the archaeologists will find this thousands of keys in the bed of river and have no clue at all why there are this thousands of keys. So
yeah, that's a really nice example.
Yeah, I quite like that sort of analogy. Peter, I remember when I spoke to you, you talked about, I mean, the future potential of your technology is quite mind-blowing, really. You started talking about interdimensionality in terms of black holes and things. So have you been doing any more thinking into that and any more reading into that?
I would like also just to mention, obviously, I'm a scientist, and obviously, so my main task is to understand the nature and report the facts. Yes, but obviously, also there is such thing like science fiction. Obviously, I was fascinated by science fiction from I was Isaac Asimov books and all these things. And
Peter, did you see that Apple have now got the rights to Isaac Asimov's Foundation trilogy?
No.
And they're dramatizing that, I think. So that's coming out on TV soon.
Oh, it's interesting, yeah. But what we recorded also, it's also recently. No, Isaac Asimov, obviously, there is a Foundation series. The book is now travels in Elon Musk rocket for millions of years. Yes, but this is a Hitchhiker Guide to the Galaxy. Actually, I think this one. We presented it on 8th of March. Yes, to the British Library. This is it's Hitchhiker Guide to the Galaxy, the copy which will last forever, we believe. Yes, this is. Anyway, and here maybe so. Also, this is one example of our crystals. So the data is just in the middle, a small square, which we've written in 42 layers. It's a magic 42 layers of data, and also we have normally write this here image. So there's a image of our universe, which is no, it's a real image taken by a satellite. European satellite, and so if somebody will find it in a very distant future, maybe it will be attracted by the image of universe, and maybe basically, at least this book will be delivered to the future.
Brilliant. Is that a new one? Is that a late? Have you made that recently?
Yes, it was the latest. It was just before it was before the closure. So we presented this 8th of March this year.
Okay.
And in a week time, so maybe it was a public event in the British Library. They celebrated for 42 years of this series of Hitchhiker Guide to the Galaxy. In British Library, there was a lot of people, and to be honest, regarding going back to this pandemic, so this was maybe was the last event which at least I was present. There was many people, yes, and I hope none of us. I think none of us. I hope caught virus, because afterwards it was everything was shut down. Yes.
That would have been an interesting new chapter to the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, wouldn't it?
Oh, yes, but again, in this Elon Musk, in his rocket, in his roster, he placed obviously Isaac Asimov Foundation series, which we recorded, but also in this car he put this hard copy. I have some hard copies even here, by the way. I bought in the library. But now, if he if he will launch it now, again, some rocket, we can give him a hard copy, of this book. Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, I think I've used up all your time, I think, so I'm going to wrap up now. But I just want to say thank you very much to all of you. Thanks again. It was lovely to sort of chat to you again.
Lovely to meet all of you, and thanks for inviting me.
David. Something we should continue.
Yeah, no, I love to.
It'd be great. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I find this very challenging area that I don't know much about it, but it's, you know, I think it's a really potentially very fruitful area to discuss.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad I could help.
Great to see you again, Peter.
Collaboration. But yeah, thank you, and all the best for everything in the future. And I hope things, you know, I hope things don't go back to normal, but I hope your lives sort of go back to some sort of you're enabled to live your lives.
Yeah,
better normal.
Yeah, stay safe.
Yeah, better normal. That would be great.
One comment, because now I hope our writing will allow about 30 megabytes of data to write in 1 minute. So this is one. So maybe we can write our conversation on 1 hour.
All right, I'm recording this, so I'm going to hold you to that, Peter.
Yeah. But anyway, but this is we did just before lockdown. This we managed to achieve such speed. But yeah. So, but it's just a reference. 30 megabytes about like I think how much is will our conversation will occupy the space in a.
It depends how much I can press it by, but I could probably get it down to about 30 meg. Yeah.
Oh yeah, then it should be 1 minute to write, but.
Okay, great. That's an amazing prospect.
Okay.
Brilliant. All right. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks so much, Mark. Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, ciao.
Bye.